After waiting for literally over 1 year, the 2020 Overwatch League Grand Finals came and went. And unlike previous years, it did not disappoint in the slightest. The showdown between the San Francisco Shock and the Seoul Dynasty delivered much like the rest of the playoffs did. It was a really fun game with tons of memorable moments. And that's why I wanted to do a quick review of sorts to talk about my thoughts on things that I noticed with the game, plus some other storylines that I think are interesting. I won't be going over every single team fight or anything, just a brief recap. Well, I suppose I should open this up by recognizing the 2020 World Champions. It's not necessarily my pleasure, but it is my duty to say congrats to the San Francisco Shock on winning the Overwatch League for a second year in a row. And no, I don't mean it in a way that I hate the Shock when I say something like that. I just find it a little boring to see a team win multiple times in a row. That's all. Let it be known that I have nothing against the Shock. I actually really like that team and a lot of their players. Although I may or may not be a little salty with their social media because they unfollowed me on Twitter just a few days after they started following me to begin with, just because I said I wanted the Dynasty to win. But regardless of my feelings, I recognize them for their greatness. The Dynasty and the Shock should really trade names because San Francisco are the real Dynasty around these parts. They remind me so much of the typical sports dynasties you see. They draw a striking resemblance to your New England Patriots and San Antonio Spurs of the world. They reigned over the league and won multiple championships. They have that resilience to them that makes it so you can never count them out in a game. They never let you rest, ever. They're vicious killers. They're a well-coached fighting machine with clutch players who do their jobs right. It may not be extremely entertaining to see the same team win it again, but the Shock definitely deserve it. There were a lot of close calls throughout the playoffs for them, but they pulled through. Unlike last year, they never even had to fight through the losers bracket to get there. They played well from start to finish, and I think that's where that championship experience comes into play. With the exception of Ons, everybody else who played in the game on the starting lineup was part of the 2019 championship roster, and I think that experience really gives them that advantage over the other teams who made the Final Four. Sure, Seoul and Philly have some players who have been there before, but it's nowhere close to the whole roster like with the Shock. San Francisco really only had to worry about Ons potentially, but he ended up doing just fine. He was a major playmaker despite having the least experience on the team, so good on him. Now let's get into some of my thoughts on the game. So I won't lie, this felt like such an unlikely finals. The Shock I expected to get here 100%, but Seoul, oh no. I had them as the dark horse contenders of the Final Four, but never did I actually expect them to make it this far. They've been so inconsistent the whole season, and on paper, all of the other teams remaining were better. I give them credit where it's rightfully due. They played very well when everything was on the line. They had a great understanding of the meta, and they took advantage of that. Seoul were peaking at the perfect time, but I still did have my doubts in the grand final simply because the Shock are so good in the playoffs. As you guys already know, they were my pick to win it all when we reached the Final Four. I discussed it in my prediction video. Given Seoul's understanding of the meta plus their previous experience against the Shock, they still did at the very least have a chance to make it a decent game. And it's pretty safe to say that they did just that. It was no cakewalk for the 2020 champions. The Dynasty seriously made them earn this thing. A lot of those maps in that set were pretty close. The first map was Oasis, and it was pretty crazy. It was back and forth on Gardens, but City Center wasn't all that close. It was a somewhat good Oasis game overall, I would say. The Shock are simply too good at control, though. Even when you make it close and you have a chance to take a round, the Shock always find a way to snatch it away from you. That's part of the reason the Shock are so difficult to stop in the playoffs. The team to dominate control usually wins the first to four, and the Shock never dropped a single control map throughout the entirety of the Final Four, and they were really good at it in the playoffs last year. It honestly scares me how good the Shock are at control. Striker and Ons completely take over on this map type. Control is so perfect for Tracer Ashe and Tracer Widow currently, and the Shock got maximum value out of it. Those two kept getting big kill after big kill during team fights. Striker in particular came alive on these types of maps. This especially goes for his performance on Oasis. He set the tone early. It was all him, and nobody on the Dynasty could stop the takeover. If you ask me, Striker is the undisputed #1 Tracer in the league. Nobody else can measure up to his kind of impact on that hero. The Shock got it done. They won the fights that mattered on Gardens before closing it out in convincing fashion on City Center. Seoul could not find the kills in the way the Shock did. They could maybe get a few picks needed to turn around a fight, but when they got 2 kills, the Shock would get 4. At that point, it's just simple math. San Francisco had the numbers advantage. I can't help but wonder if things could have been a little bit different if they tried Prophet on the Tracer or Pharah instead of keeping him on Hanzo the entire time. King's Row wasn't too close, however. Yeah, Seoul almost took that into extra rounds, but their attack was a struggle, and the Shock steamrolled until point C, really. At least we had a cool moment where Finals Prophet came to life again. That fight where he killed 3 to save Seoul from giving up a massive time bank was awesome, and it came right after the Shock found the first few kills of the fight. It was a surreal moment for a player who is often regarded as one of the clutchest players to ever touch this game. But ultimately, this would only serve as a time killer. Plus, they had a bigger task ahead of them, finishing the map. And that is something they weren't fortunate enough to achieve. They got awfully close though. Things were looking pretty good for them during that final fight when they got the opening kill on Violet, and Marvel even chimed in by negating the Striker Dragon Strike. But then it quickly went downhill when it was all orange in the kill feed. And now all of a sudden, there was a lot of room for concern going into halftime. And the concerns continued to roll onward when the Dynasty selected Hanamura for the Assault map. For the life of me, at the time, I could not understand why they would pick this map. The Shock hadn't lost a game on Hanamura since 2018 heading into this contest. Yeah, you heard me right. They basically had a 2-year win streak going for themselves. Needless to say, this move felt rather questionable, but the Dynasty were quick to shut me up. Although it didn't really seem like it at the time, Seoul did know what they were doing. They came in with a plan. It was by no means perfect, and it was hard fought until the very end, but they took Hanamura, which was absolutely massive. Talk about a serious confidence booster. They beat the Shock on their own playground. That felt like the serious turning point of the series. It was at that moment where the Seoul Dynasty realized they can do this. If they can beat the Shock on their best map, then they could accomplish anything. They could beat them on any other map in the game. There were also some pretty cool moments in general on this map, though, that I wanted to cover. For one, how about that turnaround by the Shock on point B with about 2 minutes remaining? Seoul starts by cornering and killing Super, followed by picks onto Violet and Striker. Violet then responds, but then Choi does go down, making it a 5v3 in favor of Seoul, but Violet doesn't really seem to care much about disadvantages as he casually picks up 2 more to allow for San Francisco to stabilize. The Shock are always doing this kind of stuff, and it feels like it's a different person every single time. Even when the odds are heavily stacked against that team, they find a way to get back into fights. No team does it better right now. My one other favorite moment came onto Seoul's defense when the Shock simply could not kill Gesture during a fight. Keep in mind that Marvel is dead, so if they kill Gesture, they'll have gotten rid of all of Seoul's point presence. But as hard as they tried, there's only so much you can do against a Hog who is getting double pocketed with a nano boost. Then, while he's getting fired at by everybody in the lobby essentially, he finds a kill onto Striker, and that was such a game-changing moment. It was quite humorous to watch as well. Seeing the Shock try to remove this unkillable tank from the point was hilarious. The power of hardcore double pocketing is insane. What I loved about this win though is that Seoul kept it going. They built up some momentum on Gibraltar where they truly dominated after they just barely cleared the hurdle of Objective A. That was a little close for comfort, but they seriously buckled down after this by finishing the map. Marvel and Gesture started playing out of their minds on that attack, and I was really happy to see that because I had some doubts about them heading into the Final Four. If any of you watched my Final Four prediction video, then you are already well aware that I thought Seoul's success would largely depend on their effectiveness, so it was really good to see them step up. All of that is good enough as it is, but to then full hold the Shock immediately after is even better. And the way they did it is simply spectacular. For one, they broke out the Prophet Genji, which is something I was not ready for, but to be honest, I kind of liked the pick. It was a good way to shake things up after having him play Hanzo for pretty much the entire set up until that point, and it worked. Prophet put in the work. However, the real star of the show was Fitz. It was at this moment in the series where he really started to heat up. I mean, he literally got a 50-second infrasight right off the bat. He hit shot after shot after shot. I mean, he was seriously outplaying Ons. He was like winning in convincing fashion. He straight up won the sniper battle. Prophet may have gotten a few nice Dragon Blades, but Fitz controlled the tempo. He had all the space in the world, so he really just needed to hit the shots, and he did just that. He was hitting all the big shots, proving that he really can hang in there with the best when the lights are at their brightest. So now we're all tied up. We're essentially starting from ground zero. So you're saying there's a chance, Seoul. Busan is the defining map of this series for sure. Seoul really needed to win control because the Shock have struggled on maps involving a payload, but it just wasn't meant to be. As previously stated, the Shock are simply too clutch on control maps. No matter how hard you hit them, they come back and hit twice as hard. But in all fairness, this map could have gone very differently. Both Mecha Base and Sanctuary were both 100 to 99 in favor of the Shock. But to be honest, Mechabase really should have gone the way of Seoul. They threw out a Desperation Sombra pick late into the round and had an EMP that could have clinched the round if used properly. But unfortunately, Fitz didn't really get that memo. It was great at the start as he got a kill onto Violet, but he was then a bit too quick to pull the trigger with the EMP. I don't know if it was a miscommunication issue or if he simply got too excited, but the EMP was awful. It only connected onto Smurf, who didn't even die thanks to there being zero follow-up or coordination. A game-changing ultimate got thrown away and the Shock took care of the rest. As for Sanctuary, the Shock mostly just played the resource game. They stacked up their ults on the final fight, and Seoul pretty much had nothing to work with. And how about Ants, cleaning it all up with headshot after headshot, proving that he seriously might be the best hits game player in the game. Oh, and don't think I forgot about that sick play from Prophet. Absolutely disgusting stuff. Is there anything this guy can't play well? Not only did he get 3 final blows off 3 straight shots, but he managed to find 5 total kills in a do-or-die fight. It's plays like these that proves he is still one of the best DPS players in the game by a long shot. Sadly, his efforts were in vain though, and I think that Busan was the map that just broke the back in the spirit of Seoul because they were so close and yet so far. Then Hollywood happened, and this is where the Shock truly imposed their will and took advantage. They didn't even finish the map, but that was more than good enough to get the job done. Yet again, it became the Striker show. It was an unreal performance on the Hanzo. I need to give credit where it's due to Fitz though. He did everything in his power to salvage that defense for Seoul. He was literally finding picks like every fight. The only reason the Shock failed to finish the map to begin with is because of the play he made at the end of the round, which was absolutely absurd, by the way. I mean, seriously, Striker literally killed 3 at the start of the fight. Then Fitz decides to go on a do-or-die flank and completely turns it around. He was the savior for the Dynasty on that Hollywood defense, as well as for a majority of the game in general. He came to play. What a journey he's gone through. From a nobody who played an open division to a high-tier hits game that can keep pace with the likes of Ants and Striker. I give credit to the Seoul scouting on that one. They found themselves a gem back in 2019, and he's only getting better. However, his level of effort was all for naught. The Shock were the better team. That's all there is to it. Fitz and the Dynasty tried their hardest, but the Shock simply wanted this more. The superior team play and better decision making was far too overwhelming. It was close though. This game was very, very good. I would say only Hollywood and parts of Kings Row and Oasis were the only parts where Seoul were seriously getting outplayed. It was a good run, all things considered. I was scared this was going to be another 4-0 for a while, so I'm glad that Seoul did make it interesting. I would argue this was the best finals we've ever gotten, and it was easily the closest. I suppose you could argue Game 1 between London and Philly was pretty up there too, but I feel like you have to count the entire series, and if that's the case, then Day 2 kind of ruins it. To give some concluding thoughts on this game, we have to reference the fact that Striker won Finals MVP. In my opinion, this was well deserved. He put on a legendary performance on the Hanzo and Tracer. He was dominant on control, and he outshined Prophet in the Hanzo duel. Making that trade for Striker back in the day with Boston is looking like one of the best in league history. He was a pivotal piece in both of their championship runs. Congrats to Striker. I am very happy for him. I wouldn't have minded if Violet won this instead though. He had a pretty tremendous series as well. Plus it would have been pretty cool if we had an MVP at DPS, tank, and support. It's all good though. Striker's my boy. Well, ladies and gentlemen, all hail our San Francisco Overlords. They once again reign over the league and they'll be back next year. Even if some people leave or retire or can't be re-signed, whatever it is, they're still going to be good so long as that coaching staff is around. They're beatable but absurdly hard to stop. They always stay hungry. I respect the grind and the desire to win. One last time, congrats to the San Francisco Shock on winning again. It's been a hard season for everybody, but they persevered. Well deserved. And of course, the Dynasty deserves some praise as well. They came up short of their goal, but they should feel proud of what they accomplished. This season was very hard for them, but they delivered for their fans when it truly mattered. I know you guys are hurting right now, but keep your heads up. You proved all of the haters wrong. You beat some good teams to get here, and you were competitive all the way through. I, for one, am very pleased with how they performed. For a while it wasn't looking good, but now it really does seem like the Prophet and Gesture trade was worth it. It's unfortunate that Seoul once again fell short of their goal, but this is the best they've done by far. The team that we were promised in 2018 came this year instead. They were very close to winning a championship for Korea, but unfortunately close does only count for so much. As far as I'm concerned, they still don't live up to their names. They are no dynasty, and I refuse to see them as one until they can actually win the chip. Hopefully they make the necessary changes during the offseason to take that next step. Now I just wanted to give a quick shout out to both the Shock and the Dynasty for giving us a good show. Even though I would have preferred if the Dynasty won, I'm just happy we got a good grand finals for once. The curse has been lifted, and I'm very thankful for that. Thank you, Seoul Dynasty and San Francisco Shock, for coming through with the entertainment. I left feeling satisfied, and that's all I can really ask for. Well, that pretty much wraps up my review and overall thoughts on the 2020 Overwatch League Grand Finals. What were your thoughts on the game? Let me know down in the comment section. If you enjoyed this content, then make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel if you're new. You can also follow my socials through the links in the description and hit that join button if you wish to further support me. And as always, thanks so much for watching this content. I really do appreciate it. And until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.